welcome to the Mewing breakdown. This is basically level 3 posture. Now, who is this video for? It's for everybody that has tried the posture chores, the SMR, the core rebuilding, and still cannot seem to find the progress that they're looking for. Now, mewing is basically starting with the tongue against the roof of your mouth and creating suction so that we can pressurize each breath through our nose. But we're going to take it a step further than that and use mewing to create the intra-abdominal pressure that we need along our midline. So this is going to be about finding our midline pressure so that other systems can relax, especially our brains. Once we find that balance, we won't need to oscillate back and forth. And then with some practice, we can make this our default settings so that we don't have to cue ourselves on a daily basis. Now, number one, our true midline is basically all about the internal organ protection. If this midline is offline or it's not working, then the body will compensate and continuously oscillate back and forth to find a certain level of protection for yourself. And what that's going to do is cause extra energy and strain, which basically results in a perpetual state of stress. Remember, anything out of balance must constantly oscillate and wobble back and forth. And a good example of that is if you stand up right now and try to balance on one leg, if you cannot control your midline and your hips and your core in that position, your upper body, your knees, your ankles and feet are going to wobble until the end of time. And that exercise could be good to building those structures. But what we eventually want to do is find that balance with our midline so that those other systems don't have to work as hard. Step 2 is finding inhibition so that you can restore that balance. And what I mean by that is muscles and mechanisms in our body have the antagonist movement and the antagonist movement. For example, your biceps, if you were to curl your biceps in, the muscle that is doing the work, the bicep muscle, is the agonist and the triceps is the antagonist. To contract this muscle, I have to relax this muscle. And what happens a lot in our body is there are certain agonists that are so powerful that they completely inhibit the contraction or the activation of that antagonist muscle. And the problem with having muscles or systems that are so dominant in our body is that those other systems go offline for such a long time that we lose access to those systems. Another good example of that is how the upper abs are so dominant to the rest of the core that they are inhibiting your deep core activation. That's why it's hard for a lot of people to even feel their TVA and deep oblique muscles. Because every time they go to core brace, it's just the upper abs dominating that muscular sequencing. What we want to do is get ourselves to relax enough to where the brain feels safe to make new mind-muscle connections. And another good example of that is our face. Because a lot of us are so cerebral, especially when it comes to doing exercises, we find our face in the same positions. And we're almost unable to relax our face and activate other parts of our head and neck because we have no balance. So posture level 3 is all about starting with mewing and finding that midline with a couple of exercises that will help us create that internal pressure. Then we can find a new level of mobility in our hips and our shoulders and our rib cage. And then we can experience more progress in our posture chores and eventually in our exercises and movement. So the main problem that a lot of us are dealing with in this process is that pain and trauma locks everything up. When our mind and body experience pain and injury, it braces for impact, and over time, your body's going to use the same muscles, again, that inhibit your full body integration. That's obviously going to hold us back. It's obviously going to create a lot of restrictions, and that's why some of us have chronically tight hips, no matter how much you stretch, no matter how much you SMR. The mind and body will stay in this state because the brain will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. Our main survival mechanism is protection. And it's easier for us to protect ourselves if we can predict what's going to happen. That's why sometimes it's really hard for us to break these habits. Also, we have a lot of sedentary cope, which means we just stop moving and we choose rest over movement that could expose us to more stress. And you get a lot of blood pooling in this abdominal region, obviously in your organs, and your organs lose the ability to pump blood and nutrients elsewhere in the body. And these 3 reasons make posture and biomechanical change difficult to access. Meaning these things in our body are literally restricting us from changing those positions and changing those mind-muscle connections. So the solution at this point, we already know that we have to use our breath to calm down the nervous system in order for us to feel safe and make changes. Then we use the exercises to redistribute tension, find our midline, and then our body can be reflexive and improvisational. Meaning the way we were in nature, we were supposed to be able to adapt on the fly instead of just sitting in the weight room, doing exercises and over-cueing ourselves to death. When we do these things, the change becomes our default settings, specifically this midline pressure, and we're able to calm down that sympathetic nervous response, that stress response, the thing in our mind and body that is constantly bracing for impact. So the exercises that we will do in this section are going to aim to integrate our tongue pressure, our throat and neck pressure, our lungs and diaphragm, and then the deep core and pelvic floor. If we can use this system to balance tension and compression on each breath, we will find pressure in our midline. Our bodies will be better balanced, and we will be better equipped for the reflexive and the improvisational nature of sports.